Hi everyone and welcome back to Stellar HFY. First of all, I need to say thank you. Seriously, the engagement on our recent military sci-fi stories has been absolutely phenomenal. Today, we're diving into something that hits different. A story that starts with what looks like certain defeat and transforms into the most brilliant tactical trap. We're talking about the testimony of Warlord Krex himself, the alien commander who learned firsthand why humans don't surrender. They just change the terms of engagement. So grab your favorite drink and settle in. Let's begin. Let me tell you about the moment everything changed. I was Commander Marcus Voss of the Terran Defense Fleet, running a routine patrol along the Outer Rim when the emergency beacon from Kepler 442b lit up my communications array like a Christmas tree. The signal came through, scrambled, desperate, and carrying a message that made my blood run cold. Hegemony fleet inbound, 12 capital ships, request immediate assistance. I knew what that meant. Everyone in the fleet knew what that meant. The hegemony didn't negotiate, didn't take prisoners, and sure as hell didn't leave survivors to tell tales. They had a doctrine they called exemplification. Make every conquest so brutal and complete that other species would surrender rather than face the same fate. It had worked for them across 17 different star systems, and now they were knocking on humanity's door. My tactical display showed the situation in stark, unforgiving numbers. 3 aging destroyers under my command versus 12 hegemony capital ships equipped with energy shields that had never been breached by human weaponry. Our kinetic weapons might as well have been throwing rocks at a fortress. The math was simple and terrifying. We were outgunned, outmanned, and completely outclassed. When I established contact with the colony, Dr. Tobias K. Ain's voice came through the static with the kind of calm that only comes from a man who's already made peace with death. Commander Voss, we have 15,000 civilians down here in about 6 hours before they start the cleansing protocols. I need you to know something before you make your decision. That's when Kane dropped the bombshell that changed everything. Kepler 442b wasn't just another mining colony. It was sitting on the largest known deposits of quantum-state minerals in human space. These weren't your typical rare Earth elements. They were the key component in faster-than-light drive systems. Control those minerals, and you control who gets to travel between the stars. The hegemony knew it, we knew it, and now I understood why they'd sent their 47th Conquest Fleet instead of a routine patrol. But Kane had more to tell me. For the past 18 months, his team had been using the planet's unique mineral properties to research something the hegemony thought was impossible: shield disruption technology. "We're close, Commander," he said, and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. "Maybe 72 hours from a working prototype. But we need time, and we need someone to keep broadcasting our research data to the other colonies." That's when he explained Operation Lighthouse. It wasn't just a distress call, it was a predetermined protocol where any colony facing extinction would transmit continuous technical data to every human settlement within communication range. The idea was simple: if one colony was going to die, their sacrifice would give others the tools to survive the next attack. Kane had already begun the broadcasts, sending everything they knew about hegemony shield frequencies, weapon signatures, and tactical patterns. The hegemony ultimatum came exactly on schedule. Warlord Krex himself delivered it, his translator converting his alien speech into cold mechanical English. "Human settlement designation Kepler 442b. You have 6 standard hours to surrender all military assets and submit to hegemony authority. Compliance ensures swift processing. Resistance ensures total cleansing. This transmission will not be repeated." I stared at those words on my screen and realized I was looking at the most important decision of my military career. Every tactical manual in the fleet would tell me to evacuate what civilians I could and retreat. Cut our losses, preserve the fleet, live to fight another day. It was the smart play, the logical play, the play that would keep me alive and my crews breathing. But Kane's voice cut through my tactical analysis like a laser through hull plating. "Commander, If we run now, the hegemony gets the minerals and the knowledge that humans fold under pressure. Every other colony becomes a target. But if we make them work for this victory, if we make them bleed for every meter of ground, maybe we buy enough time to change the game. I looked at my tactical display one more time, at those 12 capital ships that represented certain death for anyone foolish enough to challenge them. Then I opened a channel to the hegemony fleet and spoke the words that would either save humanity or doom us all. Warlord Krex, this is Commander Marcus Voss of the Terran Defense Fleet. Your surrender terms are rejected. Kepler 442b will remain under human control. The silence that followed stretched for exactly 17 seconds. When Krex responded, I could hear something in his translated voice that I hadn't expected. Satisfaction. Human Commander, your species' reputation for foolishness is well deserved. We will demonstrate the consequences of defying hegemony authority. All vessels will witness proper subjugation protocols. That's when I realized we'd triggered something in their military doctrine that might actually work in our favor. The hegemony couldn't just blast us from orbit. They had to prove their superiority through tactical dominance. It meant a prolonged siege instead of quick annihilation, and time was exactly what Kane needed to perfect his shield disruption technology. As I watched the hegemony fleet take position around the planet, I activated my own hidden protocol. The Terran Defense Compact wasn't some grand military alliance. It was 16 mining colonies that had agreed to disguise emergency response fleets as merchant vessels. If one colony called for help, the others would come running, regardless of the odds. I sent the coded transmission that would bring every available ship in human space to Kepler 442b. Kane's broadcasts were already reaching those colonies, carrying not just a call for help, but detailed intelligence about hegemony technology that could change everything. The trap was set, the pieces were moving, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to believe we might actually have a chance. The first 3 days of the siege taught me more about warfare than 20 years of military service. Warlord Krex was playing this exactly as I'd hoped, like a predator who wanted to savor the kill. His ships took orbital positions that maximized their tactical advantage while demonstrating hegemony superiority to any species that might be watching. It was textbook doctrine, and it was exactly what we needed. I led my 3 destroyers in hit-and-run attacks that accomplished absolutely nothing from a military standpoint. Our kinetic rounds sparked harmlessly off their energy shields. Our missiles were intercepted by point defense systems that made our technology look like children's toys. But every engagement was carefully recorded, every shield frequency analyzed, every tactical response documented and transmitted to the 16 colonies that were receiving Kane's Operation Lighthouse broadcasts. Down on the planet's surface, Kane was performing his own kind of miracle. The man wasn't just a colony administrator, he was a former asteroid miner with 20 years of experience in controlled demolitions. While his research team worked around the clock on the shield disruption prototype, Kane was organizing 15,000 civilians into a defensive network that would have impressed any military strategist. Mining equipment became artillery platforms, excavation tunnels became supply lines, and industrial explosives became the foundation of a fortress that could hold against ground assault. The colonists responded to Kane's leadership with a determination that surprised even me. These were people who'd chosen to live on the edge of human space, who'd spent years carving a home out of hostile rock and alien soil. When faced with extinction, they didn't panic or despair, they got to work. Families that had been mining quantum-state minerals for civilian applications suddenly found themselves manufacturing shield disruptor components with an efficiency that made my engineering crews look slow. By day 3, something interesting was happening in Krex's tactical patterns. His attacks were becoming more aggressive, more frustrated. The hegemony doctrine called for overwhelming displays of power that broke enemy morale within hours, not prolonged sieges that gave weaker species time to adapt. Every day we held out was a day that challenged their fundamental assumptions about military superiority. What Krex didn't know was that our resistance was serving a purpose far beyond the immediate tactical situation. The Operation Lighthouse broadcasts were reaching colonies across human space, and those colonies were part of something the hegemony's intelligence had completely missed: the Terran Defense Compact. It wasn't a formal military alliance because formal alliances would have attracted attention. Instead, it was 16 mining colonies that had quietly agreed to maintain emergency response fleets disguised as merchant vessels. The beauty of the system was its simplicity. Each colony maintained 3 to 4 ships that looked like standard freight haulers but carried military-grade sensors, communication arrays, and enough firepower to make a difference in a crisis. More importantly, they carried something even more valuable: people. When one colony called for help, the others would evacuate their civilian populations into those disguised warships and come running. I started receiving coded transmissions on day 4, brief messages that confirmed what I'd hoped. The compact colonies were mobilizing. 16 different settlements were loading their entire populations into emergency fleets and preparing for hyperspace jumps to Kepler 442b. It was either the most brilliant tactical maneuver in human history or the most spectacular form of collective suicide ever attempted. Kane's breakthrough came on day 6, just as my sensors detected massive hyperspace disturbances at the edge of the system. His research team had successfully created a working shield disruption prototype, but the delivery system was going to require a level of sacrifice that made my stomach clench. The device had to be delivered through direct energy coupling, which meant ramming a ship directly into a hegemony vessel's shield matrix. It was a one-way trip with no guarantee of success. "Commander," Kane's voice crackled through the comm system, exhaustion evident in every word. "We've got it working, but we need to get close enough to touch their shields. Can you make that happen?" Before I could answer, my tactical officer's voice cut through the bridge. "Sir, multiple hyperspace signatures detected. Massive fleet emergence in 3 minutes." The moment of truth was arriving faster than any of us had expected. Warlord Krex's response to the incoming fleet was immediate and predictable. His ships moved into defensive formation, energy weapons charging, shields at maximum power. But as 43 human vessels emerged from hyperspace and took position throughout the system, I could see the confusion in the hegemony's tactical patterns. These weren't military vessels. They were merchant ships, civilian transports, mining barges. What kind of rescue fleet brings cargo haulers to a military engagement? That's when I opened communications to both fleets simultaneously and revealed the true nature of our trap. "Warlord Krex, you are now facing 43 human vessels carrying the entire populations of 16 colonies. Over 80,000 civilians are currently positioned throughout this system, all of them broadcasting on frequencies monitored by the Galactic Trade Consortium and 7 neutral governments. Any action you take against human forces will be witnessed by every major power in this sector." The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. Krex had walked into a trap that turned his greatest strength, overwhelming military superiority, into his greatest weakness. He could still win this fight, but victory would require committing genocide while the galaxy watched. The hegemony had built their empire on fear and intimidation, but they'd never had to worry about public relations with neutral trading partners who controlled their economic supply lines. For the first time since this siege began, the initiative belonged to humanity. Kane's shield disruption technology was ready, our hidden fleets were in position, and we'd transformed certain defeat into a diplomatic crisis that threatened to destabilize the entire region. The trap was sprung, and now we just had to see if Warlord Krex was smart enough to recognize that he'd already lost. The real question was whether he'd be smart enough to walk away, or if his pride would force him into the kind of mistake that destroys empires. The moment those 43 ships materialized from hyperspace, I knew we'd fundamentally change the rules of engagement. But what happened next turned a desperate gamble into the most elegant trap I've ever witnessed. Kane's voice came through the comm with barely contained excitement. "Commander, the prototype is stable. We can disrupt their shields, but someone has to get close enough to physically connect the device to their energy matrix. It's a ramming run, and whoever does it isn't coming back. I was processing that death sentence when my communications officer started receiving transmissions from the newly arrived fleet. What I heard changed everything I thought I knew about the people we were fighting for. These weren't just refugee ships. They were entire communities that had made a collective decision to risk everything for strangers they'd never met. Captain Sarah Chen of the merchant vessel Prosperity spoke for all of them. "Commander Voss, we've got 12,000 souls aboard the ships from the Tau Ceti cluster. We're not here to run. We're here to make sure the galaxy remembers what happened today." Ship after ship reported in with the same message, the Industrial Hope carrying 8,000 from the Proxima colonies, the New Horizon with 6,000 from the outer mining stations, families, children, elderly colonists who'd spent their lives building something from nothing, all of them now floating in space between human defiance and alien annihilation. It was insane, suicidal, and absolutely brilliant. That's when I understood the true genius of what we'd done. Warlord Krex wasn't just facing a military force anymore. He was facing a moral choice that would define his empire's future. His tactical displays were showing him exactly what mine showed me. 80,000 human civilians spread across 43 vessels, all of them broadcasting their locations on frequencies that every major power in the galaxy monitored for trade coordination. The Galactic Trade Consortium had been watching our communications for months, not out of altruism, but because the hegemony's expansion was threatening established trade routes. 7 neutral governments had economic agreements with human colonies that were now at risk. What had started as a local military engagement was rapidly becoming a crisis that could destabilize commerce across 3 sectors. Krex's response came exactly 18 minutes after the last human ship took position. His voice carried a tone I hadn't heard before, uncertainty masked as authority. "Human commander, your civilians do not change military reality. Hegemony forces will complete our mission regardless of witnesses." But his fleet's positioning told a different story. Instead of maintaining their aggressive orbital stance, the hegemony ships had shifted to defensive formations that minimize their exposure to human vessels. They were reacting to political pressure that their military doctrine had never anticipated. The hegemony had conquered 17 systems by making victory so swift and brutal that other species never had time to organize opposition. Now they were facing exactly the kind of prolonged, witnessed engagement that their entire strategy was designed to avoid. The diplomatic pressure started within hours. Neutral governments that had previously ignored hegemony expansion suddenly found themselves dealing with constituent populations who were watching human families face extinction in real time. The Galactic Trade Consortium issued a formal statement expressing concern about regional stability and the protection of established commercial relationships. It was diplomatic language for "don't mess with our profit margins." I could see Krex's dilemma in every movement of his fleet. His military training demanded total victory to maintain hegemony prestige, but his political situation required a solution that wouldn't trigger economic warfare with neutral powers. The man was trapped between doctrine and practicality, and every hour he delayed was an hour that reinforced the perception that humans couldn't be easily conquered. Kane understood the strategic situation better than any of us. During one of our tactical conferences, he laid it out with the clarity of someone who'd spent decades solving impossible engineering problems. "Commander, we've made victory too expensive for them to afford. Krex can still win this fight, but winning means accepting consequences that could destroy their empire's economic foundation. We've turned their strength into their weakness." The breakthrough came when neutral alien governments began what they called protective monitoring of the situation. Ships from the Centauri Trade Federation, the Independent Worlds Alliance, and even the isolationist Vegan Republic took positions at the edge of the system, officially there to protect their economic interests, but functionally serving as witnesses to whatever happened next. Krex now faced not just military defeat, but potential economic and diplomatic isolation. That's when he invoked something I'd never heard of: the trial of supremacy. It was an ancient hegemony tradition that allowed military commanders to resolve conflicts through single combat instead of fleet engagement, preserving both honor and resources. The winner would determine the fate of both forces, and the galaxy would witness a clean resolution instead of messy genocide. Human Commander, Krex's transmission carried formal ceremony that translated awkwardly through our systems. I invoke the trial of supremacy. Single combat between commanders to determine outcome. Victor claims system and honors. Defeated accepts loss with dignity. Will you meet hegemony challenge? I looked at my tactical display, at 43 human ships carrying everything we'd built and everyone we'd sworn to protect. I thought about Kane's shield disruption technology, about the neutral witnesses, about the fact that Krex was offering me a way to turn certain defeat into possible victory. The alien commander was giving me exactly what I needed: a chance to win through human adaptability instead of superior firepower. Warlord Krex, I replied, I accept your challenge. The moment I stepped aboard Krex's flagship, I knew I was walking into a death trap designed by someone who'd studied human physiology and found it wanting. The hegemony had conquered 17 species through superior technology and overwhelming force, but they'd also done their homework on biological advantages. Krex stood nearly 8 feet tall, with 4 arms that ended in claws capable of shredding hull plating and muscle density that made human strength look like a child's toy. But I hadn't spent the last week fighting impossible odds without learning something about turning disadvantages into opportunities. While Kane's team had been perfecting shield disruption technology, I'd been studying every piece of intelligence we'd gathered about hegemony physiology. Their superior strength came with a critical weakness. Their circulatory system couldn't handle rapid pressure changes that humans survived routinely. It was information that might keep me alive long enough to complete the real mission. The combat arena was the flagship's primary corridor, a space designed to showcase hegemony and engineering superiority with curved walls that could withstand direct weapons fire and gravity plating that could be adjusted to favor the home team. Cameras from neutral alien governments were broadcasting everything live to audiences across the galaxy, turning what should have been a private military resolution into the most watched sporting event in galactic history. Krex's opening words carried the formal weight of military tradition. Human Commander, this trial will demonstrate proper hierarchy between species. Your defeat will educate others about challenging hegemony authority. But there was something else in his voice, something that suggested he was as trapped by this situation as I was. He needed a clean victory to satisfy his superiors, and I needed a victory that seemed impossible against an opponent who outclassed me in every measurable category. The combat began exactly as I'd expected. Krex's superior reach and strength forced me into immediate defensive positions, his 4 arms creating attack patterns that my human reflexes couldn't match. But I wasn't fighting to win a traditional battle. I was fighting to damage specific ship systems while staying alive long enough to trigger the sabotage I'd been planning since accepting this challenge. During our hit-and-run attacks over the past week, I'd transmitted detailed schematics of hegemony ship design to Kane's engineering team. They'd identified structural weak points throughout the flagship, places where human portable explosives could create cascading failures in critical systems. While Krex had been preparing for honorable combat, I'd been preparing to turn his own ship into a weapon against him. Every retreat I made through the ship's corridors was carefully calculated to lead us past sections where my boarding party had placed charges during the pre-combat inspection. The hegemony's honor code requires, allowing opponents to examine the arena, and my engineers had used that time to plant surprises throughout the vessel's infrastructure. Krex thought he was hunting me through his own territory, but I was leading him through a carefully constructed demolition sequence. The turning point came when Krex's superior strength finally cornered me in the ship's environmental control section. His claws raked across my chest, drawing blood and proving that human armor was no match for alien evolutionary advantages. But as he prepared what should have been a killing blow, I triggered the first set of charges I'd been maneuvering toward for the past 20 minutes. The explosion wasn't designed to kill. It was designed to breach the ship's primary atmospheric containment in a way that would create rapid decompression throughout the vessel. Krex's killing blow landed exactly as the ship's hull integrity failed, sending both of us tumbling through a corridor that was rapidly losing atmosphere to space. Here's what I'd learned about hegemony physiology that their own military hadn't considered. Their superior strength and endurance came from a circulatory system that operated at much higher pressure than human cardiovascular networks. Rapid decompression that would leave a human unconscious but alive would cause catastrophic organ failure in a hegemony warrior. As the ship's atmosphere vented into space, I could see Krex's confusion turn to panic as his own body began shutting down from pressure differential his species had never evolved to handle. His 4 arms, so deadly moments before, were now failing him as his circulatory system collapsed. The killing blow he'd delivered had been real enough. My ribs were cracked and I was bleeding from multiple wounds, but human physiology was keeping me conscious while his superior biology was killing him. I dragged myself toward the nearest escape pod bay, fighting against decompression effects that would have been fatal to any other species in the galaxy. Behind me, Krex was making one final effort to complete his mission, but his strength was failing as his body's superior systems became fatal weaknesses in an environment they'd never been designed to handle. His last act was reaching for the ship's communications array, and what he transmitted changed everything. All hegemony vessels, emergency evacuation protocols. Human commander has achieved victory through tactical superiority. Withdraw from system immediately. Then, with his final breath, he added something that would become legendary. Document for military archives. Humans possess tactical unreasonableness. Standard conquest protocols ineffective. I reached the escape pod just as the flagship's main hull gave way, launching myself into space as one of the most advanced warships in the galaxy died around me. Through the pod's viewport, I could see the entire hegemony fleet moving into evacuation formation, their doctrine demanding they honor their commander's final orders even as their military superiority crumbled around them. The trial of supremacy was over, and somehow, impossibly, humanity had won. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler 442b, I found myself sitting in the observation deck of humanity's first capital ship, watching Warlord Krex's final testimony play on screens across the galaxy. The alien commander had survived long enough after our combat to make one last transmission, and his words had become the most quoted military analysis in galactic history. The human species demonstrates what our military philosophers term tactical unreasonableness, Krex's translated voice explained to the assembled Galactic Council. They do not fight to win. They fight to make victory impossible to afford. Standard conquest protocols assume enemies will choose survival over principles. Humans choose principles over survival, then engineer survival through principles, the Record. Ding showed Krex in a medical bay aboard a neutral ship, his 4 arms connected to life support systems that couldn't compensate for the damage caused by rapid decompression. But his voice carried the analytical clarity of a military professional documenting something unprecedented for future reference. Human tactical doctrine transforms every engagement into a resource expenditure calculation that favors the defender. They will sacrifice ships, personnel, and entire colonies to establish strategic positions that make conquest economically prohibitive. Kane's shield disruption technology had been distributed to all 16 colonies within days of our victory, but the real transformation went far deeper than new weapons systems. The Terran Defense Compact had evolved overnight from a loose mutual aid agreement into the Human Defense Federation, a formal military alliance that other species now recognized as a legitimate galactic power. What had started as desperate colonies sharing emergency response fleets had become a coordinated defense network that controlled strategic resources across 3 sectors. The neutral governments that had witnessed our confrontation with the hegemony wasted no time establishing formal diplomatic relations with the new federation. The Centauri Trade Federation offered exclusive mining rights in exchange for shield disruption technology. The Independent Worlds Alliance proposed mutual defense agreements that would create buffer zones against hegemony expansion. Even the isolationist Vegan Republic sent ambassadors to discuss protective commercial relationships that would ensure their borders remained secure. What emerged was something the galaxy had never seen before, a genuine 3-way power structure that replaced the traditional hegemony dominance model. The hegemony still controlled their conquered territories and maintained superior individual ship technology, but they could no longer expand without considering human response capabilities. Neutral governments found themselves with real alternatives to hegemony protection, creating economic leverage that hadn't existed for decades. Krex's testimony became required reading at military academies across known space, not because it revealed human tactical secrets, but because it explained why traditional conquest strategies wouldn't work against our species. Humans treat certain defeat as simply another tactical problem to solve, he explained to the council. They will destroy the value of any victory through pure attrition, making conquest a guaranteed loss regardless of military superiority. The transformation in humanity's galactic reputation was dramatic and immediate. 6 months earlier, we'd been dismissed as scattered colonists with outdated technology and questionable survival prospects. Now we were studied as an example of how industrial expertise and tactical adaptability could overcome overwhelming technological disadvantages. Military strategists from dozens of species requested detailed analyses of the Kepler 442b engagement, trying to understand how mining equipment and merchant vessels had defeated the galaxy's most feared conquest fleet. Kane received offers from 17 different governments to serve as a military advisor, all of them wanting to understand how civilian infrastructure could be converted into defensive capabilities. He turned them all down, preferring to remain on Kepler 442b, where his team continued developing technologies that would keep human colonies safe. "I'm not a weapons designer," he told the reporters who tracked him down. "I'm an engineer who solves problems. The problem was keeping my people alive, and we solved it." My own career took a direction I'd never anticipated. Federation Command offered me leadership of the new capital ship Defiant, a vessel built using reverse-engineered hegemony technology that had been salvaged from Krex's flagship. The ship represented everything we'd learned about combining human tactical philosophy with alien engineering superiority. Our shields used the same energy matrices as hegemony vessels, but they were designed to be disrupted and restored rapidly, turning what should have been a vulnerability into a tactical advantage. The Defiant's crew came from all 16 Federation colonies, each bringing expertise that had been developed through decades of surviving on the edge of human space. Our chief engineer had spent 20 years maintaining mining equipment under impossible conditions. Our tactical officer had coordinated merchant fleet defense against pirates using cargo haulers and improvised weapons. Our communications specialist had managed the Operation Lighthouse broadcasts that had made our victory possible. But the real change wasn't in our technology or our military organization. It was in how the galaxy viewed human nature itself. Krex's final words had become a warning that other species passed down to their military commanders. Never assume humans will choose the rational option. They will choose the option that achieves their objectives regardless of cost, then engineer solutions that make the cost affordable. I kept a recording of those words on my personal display, not as a source of pride, but as a reminder of what we'd accomplished and what it had cost. 87 people had died during the siege of Kepler 442b, most of them civilians who'd volunteered for defensive positions they weren't trained to handle. They'd died because they believed their sacrifice would buy time for their families and their future, and they'd been The galaxy had learned that humans don't surrender, but more importantly, they'd learned why we don't surrender. It's not stubbornness or tactical ignorance. It's a calculated decision that victory over human forces will always cost more than any reasonable enemy is willing to pay. We'd turned our greatest weakness, our inability to match alien technology, into our greatest strength. The absolute certainty that fighting humans means fighting for every meter of ground, every resource, every strategic advantage. As I watched the stars from the Defiance observation deck, I knew that Warlord Krex had been right about one thing. Humans possess tactical unreasonableness. But what he'd missed was that our unreasonableness was perfectly reasonable once you understood what we were fighting for. We weren't fighting to win. We were fighting to make sure our children would have something worth inheriting. The galaxy was a safer place for that lesson, even if it had taken a war to teach it. If this story gave you chills about human tactical genius, smash that subscribe button and let us know. What's the most brilliant military trap you've ever seen in science fiction? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one, and your idea might inspire our next story. Thanks for watching Stellar HFY, where humans don't just survive, they rewrite the rules of warfare.